Peace and peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Folks, we got a lot to talk about. First and foremost, let's talk about 22 years later, how the United States of America is remembering the great tragedy of 9/11. We'll bring you the latest around that situation. Also, today, this month, it's National Preparedness Month, where we're going to talk about how you can get prepared for natural disasters and other calamities that may hit your part of the country. We'll have that conversation with Mr. Mitch Peterson of OnSAR to talk to us about that. Also, can we talk about reclaiming your wealth? We're going to be checking in for our very own Dr. Bridget, MD, as he talks to us about how to handle grief during a national tragedy, as well as some food things that we need to consider. So, folks, you don't want to miss one word of today's show. And of course, we want you to chime in because no conversation is complete without you. Make sure you join us as we're streaming live on YouTube under Roland Martin, and join us in the chat and be a Culture crew member for the day. Stay with us. It's all happening on today's edition of The Culture here on the Black Star Network. All right, folks, welcome to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Let's jump right into it because we have a lot to talk about. First and foremost, we got to let you know we're streaming on various platforms right now. Of course, you can go to our home website of blackstarnetwork.com, blackstarnetwork.com. You can download the app for free, follow us on social media, and certainly we would love your financial support to keep this momentum going. But you can find us during the live stream as well as older archive shows on the site and so much more. So make sure you go to blackstarnetwork.com when you get a chance. Also, we're streaming live on Amazon News on your Fire TV. So make sure you let folks know about that. And we're streaming live on Plex TV on Amazon and Plex. We stream 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you don't miss a word of the information and all of the good stuff that is coming and that is happening around the country and around the world. Now, we're also streaming on social media, our Facebook page under Roland Martin, and it is on our YouTube page where you can join us in the conversation. Make sure you do so. Jump in the chat as we're streaming right now on YouTube, and you could be a part of the great culture crew that is checking in right now. We got folks that are checking in from around the country, and I'm really, really excited. So we're going to do a little roll call, but we're going to also try to get things moving as well, because we don't want to miss one word of this situation. First and foremost, folks, let me just share with you that we extend our prayers, our hearts, and our condolences to the families of the victims of 9/11. And I have to say that 22 years ago, I did not, and I could not fully wrap my mind around the impact of that tragedy on September 11th, where you're talking about the plane being shot down in the situation over in the Virginia area, Virginia, DC area, or you're talking about New York City. So many lives, nearly 3,000 people had lost their lives in this great tragedy. There are a number of very, very thought-provoking documentaries that are airing right now, folks. And this is just some of the footage. I don't think any of us will ever forget this day. You know, there are always those moments in our history where you have those markers of where were you when this situation happened. I know exactly where I was when those planes went into the Twin Towers in Manhattan. And I will never forget the day of September 11th, 2001. Never forget it. And we should not forget it. We should not forget this at all, because it was a day of uncertainty. And as we look back on it, it seems like so far ago, right? But I've been saying, like, there are a number of documentaries that is on streaming services right now that check them out, because some of these documentaries are actually from victims and their families. I saw a very, very powerful one where all of the documentary was just cell phone footage directly from people who were on the ground, those who were impacted the most, those who were there, right in New York City. And they had collected all this cell phone footage and kind of pieced together and put together the story about what had happened from the beginning of that day to the very end of the day into the early morning hours in the next day. Thought-provoking, mind-blowing. And when you start to see this situation of this great tragedy, not from a political standpoint, not from a global affairs standpoint, but from a human being standpoint, just imagining that you waking up, you going about your day, you going to work on a beautiful Tuesday morning in September, still pretty nice weather, everything. I mean, blue skies. And then your day is rocked by the situation that we have all seen and experienced. Mind blowing. And the people who were there, from the first responders to the victims themselves, it's a day that will ever live in the hearts and in our minds, a day that we should and will never forget. So again, our hearts, our prayers, removing all of the other stuff. People's lives were lost in that great tragedy. People's lives were lost in a very, very tragic, ugly, horrific way. People's lives were lost. And so I don't play around personally. I just don't play around with this situation at all. Lori Parks checked in. It doesn't seem like it's been 22 years since this happened. Time waits for no one. Absolutely. It doesn't seem like that at all, Lori. I would totally agree. Thank you for checking in. My brother Damon Blissett, I see you. Sister Anastasia Paget, I see you. Peace of love to you, Sister Anastasia. Tiana, you were responding to Conscious Thought, and Conscious Thought, good to see you, bro. Good to see you, Tiana. You said, Tiana, I'm good, just reflecting on people who are no longer with us. That's it. That's it. I mean, just taking the time out to do that. Here's something I came across. I want to, and Lise and Keenan, if we could put this quote up very quickly, because we're actually streaming, we're streaming some of the memorial procession and some other activities that have been happening in New York City this morning. We have been streaming that at 3:45 Eastern Standard Time. It's expected for President Biden to make some remarks as he marks and commemorates this 22-year anniversary of the September 11th attacks. So we will do our due diligence. We'll certainly be streaming it on our site at blackstarnetwork.com. But then also we'll talk a little bit more about it later on in the show. But I wanted to bring this point up because I saw this in the New York Times this morning as they were talking about what's going to be happening in New York. Take a look at this. This is coming directly from the New York Times. And they talked about Mayor Eric Adams, who at the time of the attacks was in the police force. Take a look at this. This is how New York Times, this is a quote from Mr. Mayor. It says that Mr. Adams, who was a police lieutenant at the time of the attacks, told CBS News in an interview that he had gone to Ground Zero that day and was struck by the eerie stillness. He said that the greatest thing about New York City and America was not what happened on 9/11, but what happened on 9/12. We got up, teachers taught, builders built, and we continue to show that we were not going to bend or break. I wanted just to point this out. Then we're going to take our next pause, our first pause on this. And I understand what Mayor Adams is saying, that there was this certain type of resolve and resilience. 22 years ago, we weren't having really national conversations about healing as much as we were having conversations about healing, self-reflection now. Just thinking about 22 years ago, that wasn't that language wasn't necessarily a part of the national lexicon 22 years ago. I would advise, and I hear what he's saying, but it struck me because it's like that is part of the problem as to why, I mean, this is just me, but I think that's part of the problem as to why we want to we are not fully healed as a country. And when national tragedies like this happen, we don't take the time to process it. There's always this rush to get past it, get past it, get past it. But we don't take the time to process it. I wish that there was a national closing of schools, like every state for the rest of that week were closed, or every state would say, we're going to have these special conversations. I wish it was some sort of address to the pain, to the grief, and not just this pursuit to get back to work. I wish that wasn't the case. And that's the same thing that we have seen and time again, unfortunately, in our culture. Even after COVID, we were so fast to move on from the moment of COVID or any tragedy that we never forgot to heal, that we've almost felt like we forgot to heal, to take time to grieve, to really reflect on what had happened. And so to your point, Tiana, that's something I think that we could do. We only do those things after the fact, right? Like years later, to finally to be able to grieve. But imagine where we would have been if there was not just a national day of remembrance, a national week of remembrance, a national week of healing. We heard the response from George Bush, the president then, George Bush Jr. We heard his response. We're going to go after those responsible. That's all well and good. That's understandable. But the heart, to heal, to allow us to process, to allow us to grieve. And we do ourselves a disservice where we always want to move on to the next thing. We want to get back to whatever we were doing in spite of the pain that was just imposed on us. So I always had a problem. So again, this is not any shade on what the mayor has said, but I think it's indicative of a larger issue within our culture that we don't allow a chance to grieve, to heal, to reflect, to really allow this situation to resonate. And it's part of the messaging coming from that. As we close out, folks, part of the messaging is that we don't want to appear weak, right? We don't want to appear vulnerable. So no, we're not going to show the terrorists that you hit us, yet you hit us hard. No, you did hit us hard. Nearly 3,000 people died on that day. I saw another number. They said nearly 1,400 people died just from taking the debris. You're talking about first responders and those. When you look at the footage, when you see the people who, when that first tower fell, and then when the second tower fell, who inhaling all of that debris and all of those toxins, and they had health problems moving forward, and some of them died as a result of that. So we say 3,000, but the number is really higher. So you're talking about possibly 4,500, maybe close to 5,000 people as a result of this one act. We need a chance to breathe. That's why today I want to talk to Dr. Bridget about how do we collectively grieve, because sometimes the culture don't allow it. And think about that. Again, that was 22 years ago, but think about all the national tragedies, whether you're talking about school shootings, whether you're talking about the pandemic, whatever the national tragedy is, creating a culture to allow us to grieve, to heal, to process the pain so we can move forward in a better place. All right, look, I got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, we're going to be checking in with Mr. Mitch Peterson of OnStar General Motors to talk to us about National Preparedness Month. We'll talk a little bit about how do you prepare when in light of certain tragedies like hurricanes, but then even situations like what we experienced from September 11th, how do we prepare for that, and so much more. Stay with us. The conversations are just getting started here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
On his first day in office, with the country in crisis, President Biden got to work for us. Cutting Black child poverty in half, more money for Black entrepreneurs, millions of new, good-paying jobs. He's lowered the cost of living and prescription drugs. But there's more to do. He gets it because we all deserve dignity, safety, respect, and a chance to do more than just get by, but to get ahead.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture. Weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com. Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Welcome to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Folks, we just talked a little bit about 22 years ago, the nation had undergone a major shift in views, a major shift in a sense of security when we all experienced the attack on the Twin Towers, September 11, 2001. So again, we are streaming some of the memorial processions and some of the memorial events that are happening in New York right now. So we are streaming that on our website of blackstarnetwork.com. We also will be streaming President Biden, who's expected to give his remarks in commemoration for September 11th at 3:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will stream that as well. And then you can go back and take a look at and listen to what the president has said. But we wanted to have a conversation as we acknowledge what happened. And I talked about giving time for the country to heal, to process a tragedy of this magnitude. And this goes along with this next conversation as we talk about September being National Preparedness Month. And if you're unfamiliar with that terminology, it's what of making sure that you and I are prepared when a national, either a national tragedy takes place, or when there's a climate issue that may take place, such as hurricanes or tornadoes and floods and things of that nature. So I'm very, very excited to have my first guest for the show today, Mitch Peterson, who's checking in to give us some insight as to what is necessary, what needs to be done to make sure that we're prepared. First and foremost, Mitch, thank you so much for being with us. How are you this afternoon?
I'm great, Farajii. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the work that you do. You work with OnStar General Motors. You're making sure that people are prepared. But how important is September being National Preparedness Month, especially now, given all of the uncertain things that could happen, may happen? This seems like this is an important month for Americans at this point.
It is. It is. So National Preparedness Month is observed every September, and it's an opportunity to raise awareness about the importance of being prepared for, these emergencies and disasters that can really happen at any time. So it's a really good month to take the time to think about and learn about being prepared for disasters, look at your own situation and figure out if you're ready to deal with something like severe weather or wildfires or whatever your area might bring to you disaster wise. Are you personally ready to deal with that when it comes?
When we say getting prepared, first, I would think that, and look, I have to, for all transparency, Mitch, my dad is huge advocate of disaster preparedness, having I remember even to this day, when I was a teenager, he's like, son, you got to have like your camping gig. You got to have this, you got to have that. And all of this is like, even up to the day, son, does your family have this? Do y'all have that? You need to have certain type of water and certain type of dried foods and putting it in a place in the freezer, blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I'm gonna admit, younger, I was like, Dad, what are you talking about? I mean, this is not like zombies. You act like the apocalypse is coming. But now I'm like, Dad, what's the information? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a shift. So my thinking is, when we talk about national preparedness, I think the first part of this is getting people to actually believe that something major could happen that they have no control over, that the government may not be able to respond to quickly, that we will have to figure things out on our own, essentially. Yeah. That would be that's the first thing. That's what I'm thinking. Am I correct in thinking that we got to get people to believe that something could happen?
Yeah, I think that's the value of this month, is it brings that awareness. You don't have to look very far to find a disaster happening somewhere. We all can experience it. Here where I'm from in Michigan, we typically experience most of our disaster type stuff in the winter because we have heavy snowfall and power outages and ice storms. Other areas of the country have other types of disasters. We live in coastal areas, you have hurricanes. You live in other areas, you have wildfires. But you don't have to look very far to see that they're actually happening, and they could happen to you at any time. So being prepared is going to be critically important.
What's the first step? So what are some of the key things that you would recommend in this disaster preparedness plan?
I think number one is to open the lines of communication. Most, if not all, areas have some form of an emergency notification network or emergency alerting system. You can sign up to receive text messages that have important information about something that's going on in your community. Some areas have applications that you can download, and it gives you notifications when either something is impending, a storm or something is on the way, or something has happened that was unpredicted. And it has important information about things like whether you should shelter in place or you should be evacuating, where the local emergency shelters are. But opening those lines of communication will give you that conduit to get the important information you need when something is either going to happen or has happened and you need help.
All right, so we're talking about open lines of communication. And if you live in some of the urban cities, like I live here in Los Angeles, so you have a lot of cities that are highly congested. Mm-hmm. The first thing that many people probably would think is going to the supermarket, which, as we saw during the pandemic, can be a crapshoot, depending on where you live and all of that stuff. So talk to us about preparing like food, non-perishable items, things of that nature. What does that look like? What is the best plan of action to get that?
Well, this is where your dad's advice comes in handy, right? So having that stuff on hand is going to be important. So if you're involved in a disaster and you may have to shelter in place in your home for several days and you won't have access to the grocery stores, you won't be able to get out and do things. Maybe the routes are blocked or you're snowed in or whatever area you're in, you may not have the ability to get out and get the things that you need to survive. So having enough fresh water on hand, having non-perishable foods, right? Because the stuff in your refrigerator might not last as long as you need it to be there. So having some non-perishable things that you can feed yourself and your loved ones with. Having a first aid kit so you can deal with some emergencies, because during these disaster situations, the emergency responders are very busy. Their access routes to help you may be blocked or slow them down. So having some ability to take care of yourself or somebody that's injured, having first aid training and CPR training is going to be important. Having maybe a toolkit or even at least a multi-tool that you can use if you have something that you have to do, again, because help could be far away. But having those items in your home, and I think it's just important to point out that you should have those items, at least some of those items, in your car as well. You could be stranded on the roadway for a period of time when these emergencies happen. You're not always going to be home when it happens. So if you have some things in your car, some extra water, a couple of snacks, some granola bars or something, but some way to take care of yourself for the time that you're stuck, I think that, again, your dad's advice is good. You hope that you never have to use that stuff, but if you have a disaster, if you have an emergency, you'll certainly appreciate that it's there.
How much stuff do you stockpile for? What's the time frame, Mitch, that you would recommend? You talking about, 4 weeks of stuff, eight weeks of stuff? How much time, how much amount of food and non-perishable should you plan for?
So I think when we're talking, our typical disasters that we experience here in the country, I would say at least several days worth, maybe up to a week as a minimum, right? So enough, and you have to think about who's in your house as well. If there's just one person, you're gonna stockpile a little bit less. If there's a number of people, I have a family of 4, we're gonna have, we have extra stuff in the house. I have extra water and extra non-perishable food, but to make sure that you can at least get through the first several days up to a week. Hopefully by then, right, the responders, your local community are making their way through and they can help get you the resources that you need.
And what about those who live in apartments, our seniors that may be living in some assisted living spaces, where people don't have, the backyards, they don't have that extra space? What would you recommend?
I think still finding a spot to put that, even if you just put some extra water, some bottled water in the closet, some non-perishable food in the closet, just something that you have on hand so that if those resources aren't available to you and you don't have the ability to get out and get them, that you have something in the house to take care of yourself. So even if you don't have a ton of space, I don't think that you need a whole warehouse to put this stuff away. I think instead you need to find a spot to put just enough stuff to get you through.
Absolutely. We got to take a quick pause, Mitch. When we come forward, I'd like to ask some more questions as we're talking about national tragedies as well. Folks, join us in the conversation. I'm talking to Mr. Mitch Peterson from OnStar to talk to us about September being National Preparedness Month. Are you prepared? Now, let me throw this out there very quickly. The United States government, folks, they actually have a website that you should definitely check out. It's www.ready.gov. www.ready.gov. If you want to get more details about September and how this is National Preparedness Month, their website is ready.gov/September, ready.gov/September. I'm gonna ask my team when we come back to make sure we post that website so folks, y'all can know exactly where to go, what type of resources are at your disposal as we have this conversation. Oh, okay, my team is right on it. There it is right there, ready.gov, folks. This is the official website coming from the United States government, the Biden-Harris administration, and more importantly, what you can do to get yourself prepared for any national any climate changes, whether it's floods or tornadoes, hurricanes, everything. And so ready.gov. Look, got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, more conversation about keeping you prepared. Stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
President Biden has delivered for Black America. More funding for Black entrepreneurs. Millions of new good-paying jobs. He's lowering the cost of medications and the cost of living. Joe Biden is delivering for us, and that's the facts.
Pull up a chair. Take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money make this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com. Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. We have been checking in with Mr. Mitch Peterson of OnStar. We've been talking about September being National Preparedness Month, and I'm very, very happy that we got Mitch's time just a little bit to talk to us about it. This is not one of them sexy topics, but it's certainly an important and a very, very informative topic, which is why we want to have these discussions, because we know that there is so much uncertainty in the world. Natural disasters can hit at any time. It doesn't even matter the season. And I want to bring Mitch back into this part because, Mitch, I think that you and I know people say, oh, you live in this part of the country, you should only expect this. It's like, we can't even put that certainty. Maybe 30 years ago, we could say, okay, in Michigan, it only gets this type of weather. California gets this type. Now it's snowing in LA. It might be roasting in Michigan. You see what I'm saying? And people are really thrown off. So I'm really, really excited and happy that we at least have some parts of this conversation. And again, folks, this is huge. So I'm not expecting us to cover all of the bases here, but at least get people thinking. And our culture crew, Mitch, is checking in. Folks all around the country are explaining. And a lot of these folks are like, look, I don't take no chances in dealing with natural disasters, especially natural disasters, because a hurricane, a blizzard, a flood can hit at any time. That's just how bad the climate is and how crazy the climate is. Anastasia, you checked in and says, the Girl Scout leader, we had each child to make a first aid kit, which to make, start now by pre-cook and freeze your food, pre-make meals, save your juice containers, yes, for water sitting in the sun. So she brings up an excellent point, getting children prepared, getting them to think about how to prepare for the uncertain. What's your take on that, Mitch?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't think you can start too early, preparing for these types of things. We can teach our children to be prepared for these types of emergencies as they reach an age where they're maybe home alone. You won't be here if something happens potentially. So I think having them prepared in the home. My children are now of driving age, and I've impressed upon them the importance of having that emergency kit inside their vehicle too. And I know they don't love having all their trunk space taken up by all the things Dad said to put in there, but again, if they ever need it, right, it's going to be there to help them. So I think that preparing the children is also very important.
Oh, absolutely. Janelle checked in. Janelle, you said, after moving home to take care of my mom, I've had to be creative by putting stuff in the back of the closet and storing things under the beds and sofa. So just to that point, as I made earlier, about making space, it sounds like she's gotten very creative to make that space. Your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And, I've done the same thing in my home. I've pushed them, put some stuff away in some, sealed containers. So they're also protected from the weather. If you had a flood inside your house or something else, you want to make sure the non-perishable food that you had is protected and is going to be there for you. So I use some plastic containers to put that stuff in, and I hide it away, certainly to protect it, and also to make sure nobody eats all the granola bars before we need them.
Right. How about that? And freeze dry food. I've seen like packs of this. I know that in the military, of course, that's a part of the preparedness package for our soldiers. So talk to us about like having those items, because those are more like specialty items. You got to go to certain stores to get that. That's not going to be found in your normal shopping center. So talk to us about getting those type of items, including it in our kits, getting the access to that.
Sure. So, as far as the meals ready to eat, the prepackaged food, from the military type aspect, those can be ordered online. I mean, I don't know anywhere near me that sells them where I could walk in and buy them, but you can get those. But I think that you can adequately prepare at your local grocery store. There's non-perishable food that don't require power or running water or anything else. You could live out of an emergency kit that you have built from your local grocery store. You just have to be selective. You have to make sure it's not perishable, that's sealed away. And the other thing you have to think about is, we put this stuff away for a period of time. Things do expire. This is not an emergency kit that we build and hope that it's going to be there for us in 30 years. It's something we should be looking at all the time. And if we have expired items, it's time to change those out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Lana checked in. Lana, you said I buy cases of bottled water each time I go to the store. I never stop after COVID. That was our warning. So COVID, of course, is like the monkey, the wrench that just threw everything out of order. Every sense of security, I think, was tested because of COVID. So there are two areas of these tragedies and these disasters, and I'm glad Lana brings this up. You have a situation like COVID, and then we have a situation like what we experienced with September 11, one national tragedy, when things happen that we never thought would happen actually did happen. So how do we prepare for that, Mitch? How do we prepare for a biological, more of a airborne type of situation? And then we prepare for some level of, domestic terror or international terrorists. Like I don't think internationally that may happen, but domestically things may happen.
Sure. I think the preparedness at your personal level should be the same. COVID gave us all a really good look into what it's like when you don't have access to grocery stores, or when you do, there's not things on the shelves that you need, right? There was the water and the toilet paper and all the different things that you couldn't get your hands on. So I think that as we look at, disasters, no matter where you live, no matter what the disaster might be, they're unpredictable. They all have different characteristics to them, but the preparedness is still the same. Again, that opening the lines of communication, building a disaster kit, having some resources. The one thing that I missed on the disaster kit is, having the resources to maybe charge your cell phone when the power's out, having some sort of, power bank or battery powered power bank that you can charge your cell phone, because again, that's going to be your link to that communications conduit. Another thing that we don't think about very often is safeguarding our important documents. We put things away so they don't get damaged or lost, but safeguarding your important documents against these disasters, keep them in a waterproof and fireproof container so that you can get to them when you need them, right? What happens after a disaster? We have to make insurance claims. We have to have our identification. We have to have all of those things. Having those safeguarded, put away somewhere where they're going to be safe and going to be there for us when we need them is very, very important.
And we're talking about those documents, whether it's birth certificate, social security cards, you're talking about even it could be car registration, those level of documents, right?
Absolutely. And putting those somewhere where they're protected from the elements, whether it's water or fire. And it's not a bad idea to have a digital copy of those, password protected, something very secure, obviously, but having a digital copy of those as well, because you may not be able to get back to your residence. You may not be able to get back to that for a period of time, and having some way to access those digitally will be important.
Mitch, we got a few moments left, but what about electronics? We live and die on the cell phone, on the iPad and other devices. What is the game plan? What's the preparedness plan for our electronics?
Well, I think it's good to have those, right? They certainly allow us to access information. We all have different reasons that we love our electronics. My kids will certainly tell you that it's not for emergency information. They have other things they want to do with them. But having those gives you that access to emergency information. I think the best thing that I can tell you is to keep in mind those are battery operated as well. And a day may come where you don't have power to charge those, and having some means of plugging those in, a power bank, maybe even just a charger that you can plug into your car and use the power from your vehicle to charge it, but keeping at least one of your devices charged so you have access to that information as it's coming in during the disaster, and the mitigation information after the disaster that comes from your local officials telling you where the evacuation routes are, or updates on when the power is going to be back on, all those different things. Your electronics will be valuable to you.
Now, I know one of the big things as we wrap up here, Mitch, but one of the big things that I've heard is that, during a natural disaster or any type of calamity, that you got to, tap into some other skill sets like using a map. I haven't used a map in years, Mitch. I'm going to be honest with you, man. I haven't used one in years. So if you pull out a map and I'm like, trying to reorient myself. But what's your take on that in terms of like packing maps and more importantly, just having the skill set to be able to use those maps when our GPS is down and we're trying to get out of the situation?
Yeah, I think the ability to read a map and having a map with you is always important. Your electronics aren't always going to work. Even if we have them charged, maybe the service is down. So having the ability to find your way out of different areas for an evacuation route or anything else is going to be important. The other thing I want to keep in mind, right, is that if you have an OnStar equipped vehicle, you can get that information from us. A simple push of the button inside the vehicle, we can help give you routing information, get you to the places that you need to be, put you in contact with your loved ones, find hotels or even gas stations that are open outside of the disaster area so you can fill up your car. But if you have an OnStar equipped vehicle, you can definitely access that information through us.
Absolutely. All right. Sheldon Beamer, you checked in. I think this is a great point before we wrap up. He said, Sheldon said, I'm 66 years old, man. I'm a 66-year-old man with no family or friends. How do I get ready? That's a great point, Sheldon. Thank you for checking in. Mitch, what would you say to Sheldon?
I think it's critical that we follow some of the points we talked about today, making sure you have that emergency kit, open the lines of communication, and make sure it's both ways. If you have a local community center that you can check in with, I know most community centers will help keep track of those that don't have anybody else that they can contact. But making sure that you have those lines of communication open, you have your emergency kit, all of those points for disaster preparedness will be especially important if you don't have anybody to help you.
There it is. Mitch Peterson checking in from OnStar, giving us his insight in the latest around National Preparedness Month. Mitch, where can folks get more information about how they can stay prepared?
So they can certainly visit us. We'd love for you to visit us on our website, onstar.com. And during an event, they can follow any of our updates on X.
There it is right there. All right, Mitch, thank you so much. And folks, we'd like to throw out there as well that you can get more information and a lot more resources on the government's website at ready.gov. Thank you so much, Mitch, for joining us this afternoon. Folks, you're welcome. Folks, we got to take another quick pause. When we come forward, let's switch gears. Let's talk about health and wellness. We're going to check in with our very own Dr. Bridget, MD, for this week's Reclaim Your Wellness. Stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
On his first day in office, with the country in crisis, President Biden got to work for us. Cutting Black child poverty in half, more money for Black entrepreneurs, millions of new, good-paying jobs. He's lowered the cost of living and prescription drugs. But there's more to do. He gets it because we all deserve dignity, safety, respect, and a chance to do more than just get by, but to get ahead.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture. Weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation, folks. We had just a fantastic, very informative conversation with Mitch Peterson from OnStar to talk about September being National Preparedness Month. Folks, you can never be over-prepared because anything can happen, as we can see. So great conversation with him. Plus, we kicked off the show remembering 9/11, 22 years ago of that great day, that great tragedy that struck the shores of America. And folks, this is the day that will forever live in our hearts, minds, and spirits. And again, our condolences and hearts and prayers go out to the families. But it is something else that even 22 years later, the moment and all of that has occurred around the falling of the Twin Towers, the falling of the taking down of the plane in Virginia, all that, how it has reverberated and has really, really struck a chord. So if you missed the first hour of the Culture, make sure you do your due diligence, be a part of Team Replay, check it out, and most importantly, continue to support us here on Black Star Network. Well, folks, as we talk about 9/11, and I made the point that we should not move fast to grieve, I wanted to bring this up to be part of today's conversation with Dr. Bridget. So let's talk about how we can reclaim your wellness with Dr. Bridget Cole-Williams, MD. Peace, Doc. How are you?
Great. It's good to see you, Farajii.
It's good to see you as well. So, Doc, let's talk a little bit. I know we got a couple of things on the agenda, but I wanted to pick your brain. You are a family physician. You work with people in a lot of different capacities in terms of health and wellness. But let's talk a little bit about grief, because I feel like in our current culture, Doc, we don't like to show that level of vulnerability. Like, it's really hard for people to take time away. And when I saw what Mayor Eric Adams said about, he appreciated the fact that even after 9/11, people got back to work on 9/12. And I'm thinking to myself, no disrespect, Mr. Mayor, but that doesn't sound healthy. That we don't take the time to grieve. And a lot of the crew members, they say, look at what happened when we had the COVID pandemic. We had over 1 million people have lost their lives, and we kind of moved on.
Right.
There was this rush to get back to normal without recognizing, I'm saying fully, collectively recognizing that this tragedy, whether you're talking about 22 years ago, or whether you're talking about two or 1 year ago, that people have lost their lives, and we don't take time to process it, to grieve about it, to acknowledge it to the point where we can learn from it, be empowered by it, and most importantly, we can move in a much more clearer space. And I feel like that's part of the problem in the culture.
Yeah.
That pain keeps getting compounded. And I see that within Black America. Yes. We don't grieve in Black America.
Right.
So after, a national tragedy, or after some shooting, or after whatever the issue is, it's like, we got to get back together. Talk to us about this. Like, why aren't we grieving?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I would say, number one, I don't think everyone is as self-aware or is as comfortable as being self-aware as you've expressed, and how, you're living your experience. For many people, the best way of approaching grief is the denial aspect of it. There are 5 stages of grief. That first stage, quote unquote first stage, meaning that people don't necessarily do them in order, but that first stage tends to be denial. And for some, and I think sometimes just in Black America, that sometimes denial is an easy way to approach it. The whole idea is that, we're back to work on 9/12 is basically saying, we don't have to face this. We don't need to confront our feelings, that we can just keep going on and keep pushing along as if it never happened. We definitely had some aspect of that with 9/11. And, today, definitely, I watched some of the coverage today of the memorial, and it definitely hit. It's been 22 years, and it's still very, it's still something palpable.
Yeah.
Palpable. Still in America. But for some people, whether it's a shooting, whether it's 9/11, whether it's COVID, it's easier to hit that denial mark, stay in it, sometimes going into the anger aspect of it, but actually dealing with it on a deeper level is not something that we're all well equipped to do.
So then that means that what? Like you saying that there are all of these stages of grief. That means that we have to become even more self-aware that we need to go through these stages. Because I think, like you're saying, that first stage of being in denial, and this is kind of like an ironic, oxymoronic type of thing, where you're like, that didn't happen. Right. Even though you saw it, even though we're experiencing it, it's like, no, that can't be it. It's got to be something else.
Whether it didn't happen or it's not affecting me. So the denial part isn't just whether this happened or not, because clearly in most of these situations, there's no, COVID is a little bit different, but there's no denying that it happened. But we tend to be in a space where we say, oh, I'm good. It's not affecting me. I'm fine with it. because to admit anything else sends you into these other areas of greater emotion that is a lot harder to deal with. I think also, when we are taking care of our families and we're trying to be, the strong one, so that they don't, our children or other family members don't see us breaking, we immediately hit that, I'm just fine. The denial isn't just whether the incident happened or not. The denial is also how do we process it? And that we say to ourselves that, oh, I don't need to do anything. I can just, move ahead as if nothing happened. And unfortunately, that in itself can lead to bigger issues. As I was alluding to before, there are 5 stages where it's denial, anger, bargaining, where you're trying to make many times some sort of deal with God, or trying to create a foundation or something to somehow keep things in some sort of bargaining mode. Of course, depression, and then finally getting to acceptance. Now, everyone doesn't always go through all 5 stages, and we definitely don't go through all of them in order. Hopefully, acceptance is where we end up. But what they have found with particularly 9/11 is that there is now a new diagnosis of prolonged grieving disorder, where typically you look at grieving in, several months to a year or so. But when not only, it's not so much whether it's a year or more, but the intensity of intense grieving, where you're thinking, obsessing, unable to let go for over a month and longer, is prolonged grieving. And for some people, particularly when we have these anniversaries, it sends people right back to those early stages of grieving. And that we struggle with this. Everyone knows where they were on 9/11. And I have to say, watching it this morning, I was sent right back to that space, right back to those moments.
So let me ask you this question, Doc. Let me ask you that, because that is that's a lot to take in. I'm gonna ask you this question, get your take, and then I know we got to take our next pause. But it makes me think about not just 9/11, but when I was at an event just a few weeks ago for Black Lives Matter. This was early in the summer here. And I saw Sabrina Fulton, the mother of Trayvon Martin. And she made a remark in her speech to the people. She said, people always ask me, how am I doing? She said, I am doing good because God is with me. And she was just pressing on that. And it made me think about individuals like her, other families that have lost loved ones in a very highly publicized tragedy, and how each year we acknowledge that tragedy. And I always thought to myself, Doc, are we doing more harm than good? Because it constantly takes people back from the current place to the past space, to that task. And so when you said that, like you were taken back to 9/11, same thing with me. As I'm looking at this stuff, I've been looking at documentaries over these past few days and looking at like all of the other dynamics in 9/11. I'm like, are we doing more harm than good when we constantly bring it up without having serious conversations on how to process it, or how to see it, or how to get past it in a very productive way? What's happening there?
I think it can be that. I think it depends on how well you've processed this. I think in some cases, people are going back to those early stages of grief and are really going through another episode of suffering and discomfort and emotion and pain. I think if you have processed this well, then you can take those anniversaries of, tragedy and able to see it in a different way, able to celebrate the life that has moved on. It depends on where you are in your grieving, in your acceptance, in sometimes in your faith, that determine how you process this when it comes up every year. Some people go into a horrible dark place when these anniversaries pop up, And other people take those moments as an opportunity to remember and celebrate their loved ones. And it depends on whether you've done the work or not.
Depends on whether you've done the work. All right, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, more conversation with Dr. Bridget Cole-Williams, MD, Dr. Bridget, MD, for Reclaim Your Wellness. Got word that the president has started to speak, so we're going to try to see if we can get just a few words from President Biden as he speaks on the 22nd anniversary of 9/11 and so much more. Stay with us, team. Stay with us, crew. Stay with us, folks. And we got a lot more to cover here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
President Biden has delivered for Black America. More funding for Black entrepreneurs. Millions of new, good-paying jobs. He's lowering the cost of medications and the cost of living. Joe Biden is delivering for us, and that's the facts.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. We've been checking in with our very own Dr. Bridget, MD, for this week's Reclaim Your Wellness, talking about handling grief. And we just got word, Doc, that President Biden has just started speaking. So I just want to jump in and see if we can get just a few of the remarks from the president, just a quick excerpt as he talks about the 22nd anniversary of the attacks on the Twin Towers and in Virginia. And more importantly, how the country could possibly move forward. So let's check in now with President Biden.
The last few days, their memory has been with me. I'm just returning from the G20 summit in India, where we strengthened America's leadership on the global stage, followed by a historic trip to Vietnam, where we transformed our partnership in one of the most critical regions in the world. These trips are an essential part of how we're going to ensure the United States is flanked by the broadest array of allies and partners who will stand with us and deter any threat to our security. To build a world that is safer for all of our children, something that today of all days we're reminded of is not a given. Because through this military base is located on ground zero, we know the distance did not dull or diminish the pain we felt all across the nation of September 11th. Because we know that on this day 22 years ago from this base, we're scrambled in high alert to escort planes through the airspace. Alaskan communities opened their doors to stranded passengers. American flags sold out in every store and were placed in front of seemingly every home. We know that on this day, every American's heart was wounded. Yet, every big city, small town, suburb, rural town, tribal community, American hands went up, ready to help where they could, ready to serve like so many of you here, ready like Chief Master Sergeant Shady Taylor, here with us today, who had recently started college when Flight 93 went down a few miles from Shanksville. She said, and I quote, "I immediately knew I wanted to sign up and suit up to serve my country." Ready like General Eifler, who said on that day, "When our nation calls, we must be ready." It called, and we went without hesitation. My fellow Americans, September 11th, 2001, tested our strength, our resolve, and our courage. The billowing smoke and ash that darkened the clear blue sky that September day. The shredded steel and concrete slabs that rained down from the World Trade Center. The plume of fire that shot up in the sky in Pentagon. I remember seeing as I got off the Amtrak train on my way to work in the United States Senate. The pit into the earth in Shanksville, a testament to the unbreakable courage and resolve of the American people. But we'll never forget that when faced with evil and an enemy who sought to tear us apart, we endured. We endured. But while every year we mark this hallowed day, it's never easy. To anyone here or anyone across the country who's grieving a lost child, parent, spouse, sibling, friend, or coworker, to all those who still bear the wounds from the searing September morning, I know how hard it is on a day like this. How can we reopen that wound? It's like opening a black hole in your chest, sucking you into it again, bringing you back to that moment when you saw the news, the moment you got that phone call, the moment you realized you'd never say again, "See you later, Mom," or "Talk to you soon, son." Think of everything your loved one might have done if they had a little more time. What would they have done? And though that can leave you so hollow, it also makes you full at the same time. On this day, I'm thinking about a friend of mine named Davis, who grew up with me in Delaware. 22 years ago, he and his family had just passed the first year without their youngest son of 3 sons, who died in a boating accident at age 15. His oldest son, Davis Jr., was just 6 days in a new job on the 104th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Davis went straight to ground zero to search for his son, search deep into the last, as he referred to it, innings of hope, as he put it. A few days later, I called David to talk as fathers know about losing a piece of your soul. I was on my way to speak to students at the University of Delaware to try to make sense of what happened. And guess what? Having lost 2 sons within a year, Davis told me, "Just tell them, Joe, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid." The terrorists stole 2,977 souls that day. 2,977 souls, forever rolling the future of so many families and the story of our nation. But those terrorists could not touch what no force, no enemy, no day ever could, and that is the soul of America. What's the soul of America? It's the breath, the life, the essence of who we are. The soul is what makes us us. The soul of America is based on a sacred proposition that we're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We haven't always lived up to it, but we've never walked away from that proposition either. The soul of America is the fortitude we found in the fear of that terrible September day, the purpose we found in our pain, the light we found in our darkest hour, an hour when terrorists believed they could bring us to our knees, bend our will, break our resolve. But they were wrong. They were dead wrong. In the crucible of 9/11 and the days and months that followed, we saw the stuff America's made of. Firefighters and police officers and other first responders running into an inferno of jet fuel debris at ground zero, breathing in toxins and ash that would damage their own health, but still refusing to stop for months. Civilians and service members of the Pentagon rushing into the fiery breach again and again and again to rescue their colleagues in the Pentagon. The Patriot passengers on Flight 93, think of this, who did not know the horror that awaited them, but they confronted the unimaginable, fear and terror, with absolute courage. It's astonishing. The poet Maya Angelou wrote, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. But if we faced it with courage, we need not live it again." My mother had it put it a different way. My mother was a 5'2" little Irish lady who had a backbone like a ramrod. She used to say, and I mean this sincerely, courage lies in every heart. And the expectation is that one day it will be summoned. On September 11th, it was summoned at 9:57 a.m. It was summoned, and 40 incredible women and men in Shanksville answered the call. Civilians, they gave their lives, and in doing so, they gave life to their country. We saw that courage at ground zero in the Pentagon, and we saw it in so many other ways. These are heroes, like the faith community leaders all across the country who pushed back against the fear and hate they saw directed at Muslim Americans and Middle Eastern Americans of South Asian descent. Heroes like all of you, the brave women and men of the armed forces who never faltered, you never failed to defend our nation, our people, and our values in times of trial. Heroes like the 9/11 generation. Hundreds of thousands of brave Americans were deployed to Afghanistan to make sure the United States would not be attacked again. Who served in Iraq, like many of you probably did, in war zones around the world, risking their own safety and the safety of their fellow citizens, for the safety of their fellow citizens. Who served and sacrificed again and again to defend our democracy and deny terrorists a safe haven. Who followed Osama bin Laden to the end of the earth and ultimately send him to the gates of hell 12 years ago. And then last year, I made the decision to take out Zawahiri, the number 2 who met the same fate. And today, our intelligence community has recently assessed in a declassified memo that al-Qaeda threat from Afghanistan and Pakistan has reached a historic low. So all this has changed over the last 22 years. The resolve of the American people has proved we never bow, we never bend, we never yield. Our longest war is over, but our commitment to preventing another attack on the United States and our people and our allies will never, never rest. Never. Terrorism, including political and ideological violence, is the opposite of all we stand for as a nation that settles our difference peacefully under a rule of law. We're going to continue to track terrorist threats in all forms, wherever it may be. We're going to continue to disrupt terrorist activity wherever we may find it. And I will never hesitate to do what is necessary to defend the American people, just as I will never forget our sacred duty to those of you who serve. Never before in our history has America asked so much for so many over such a sustained period for all volunteer force. You make up 1% of the population. You're the strength, the venue, you're the backbone, you're the sinew of America. As a nation, we have many obligations, but I've been saying for 30 years, we only have one truly sacred obligation: to prepare those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they return home and when they do not return home.
That was, of course, President Biden as he gives his remarks in honor of the 22nd anniversary of September 11th. We're still on with Dr. Bridget, MD. Folks, we're going to take another quick pause when we come back. Dr. Bridget, I got some questions for you and so much more. And crew, I would love to share your thoughts. So join us in a conversation. We are streaming on YouTube under Roland Martin, and that's where you could be a part of the Culture Crew. And we're also streaming on Facebook as well. So stay with us. More conversation here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
On his first day in office, with the country in crisis, President Biden got to work for us. Cutting Black child poverty in half, more money for Black entrepreneurs, millions of new, good-paying jobs. He's lowered the cost of living and prescription drugs. But there's more to do. He gets it because we all deserve dignity, safety, respect, and a chance to do more than just get by, but to get ahead.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches. I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. We just played just a brief excerpt from the remarks from President Biden as he does his part of honoring those who lost their lives 22 years ago due to the September 11th attacks. And we're talking about grief, talking about this with our very own Dr. Bridget, MD, for this week's Reclaim Your Wellness. Dr. Bridget, thank you again for talking about this. The president made some things. Of course, you know, he did the piece about the soul of America. Mm-hmm. He did the piece, and I was just kind of taking a few notes here. He talks about having the courage to face adversity, He brought in the strong line of, you know, we will not bend, we will not bow, we will not yield. And I understand all of that. But I did not hear too much of we will heal, we will grieve, we will continue to honor in some way, shape, or form. Talk to us, and this is not to throw shade on the president. I'm just saying that this culture that we have is often dictated by those at the top, and that this still has to be a value, a priority. Self-care, collective care has to be a part of the agenda. It can't just be all tough talk, all retribution, and no humanity.
Well, I definitely think he chose his speech for the audience that he had at that time. So he was at I believe was it the Air Force Base or in front of the troops, and was kind of, you know, supporting them and basically giving a speech that was very geared to that audience. The one thing that was really hitting me, and based on, you know, our conversation as well as listening to the president, was my first question is, why do we culturally across, you know, the world, why do we remember and focus on death? And I think that's part of what you're kind of getting at. Like,
yeah,
you know, we do this every year, and we kind of rip the scab off of maybe something that was healing. And why do we do that? And what really comes to me is that when we are faced with our mortality, when we are in incidents like this, we're more aware of how finite life is, about how time is fleeting, and that for all of us, you know, death never comes, you know, right on time, right? It is always in the moment, you know, we always wish we had a little bit longer, right? And so I think what this does is that it helps us realize our life, that many times we get so caught up into our day-to-day problems, that we get so caught up into the minutia of what our difficulties are, and, you know, the bus didn't show up on time, and the boss said that. We get so caught up into the minutia of our life. We take a look at our mortality. When we take a look at death, we are then put into a perspective of our humanity, of kind of regaining perspective to maybe, it's sad to say, but death gives life meaning.
Absolutely. I agree.
Pull back from this, that we hopefully we're a little bit kinder today, right? That we're a little bit more gentle to our coworker, that we hug our children a little bit longer, because it's in moments like this that we realize, you know, all that stuff that I complain about really isn't that big of a deal. And that when people don't grieve well, sometimes I believe it's because they cannot the daily problems are so humongous, so overwhelming, that the idea of being connected to our own mortality is hard to get that perspective when the problems of our daily lives are so overwhelming. So we do need to grieve properly. We do need to take that time for healing, and we do need to remember, because in remembering, we give more meaning to the life that we have.
Absolutely. Janelle, you said Farajii, the president was addressing active duty military in Alaska. Yes, the president is in a joint base in Elmerdorf, Richardson, Alaska, and Anchorage, Alaska. You said, you know, that while the GOP is accusing the military of being woke, the vice president's speech was probably geared toward a civilian audience. And I get that, you know, and I'm glad that you brought up the point. But even for the military audience, you see what I'm saying? Like, there is a decline in the military right now in this country, that the military is not enrolling a large amount of people because there is a change. And I think there's a change in attitude. I think, to your point, Doc, you said it perfectly. People are tired of hearing about death, and the way that we have conversations about death and how we process death is people are kind of pushing back on it. That you know, and I think COVID brought this point home that guess what? Working this job is not more important than my life.
100%.
You see what I'm saying? Even being in the military, you sign up for the military because of a number of different reasons and factors. But at the end of the day, the military still has to be mindful of the importance of healing, for lack of a better word, right? Because our soldiers are coming back home. And when I say our soldiers, these are our family members. Our family members are coming out of, in some cases, spaces of war, but they are under tremendous stress, tremendous emotional, psychological stress, that when they come home, this country is not always welcoming.
No.
I mean, just ask any vet in this country, right? So I'm just thinking about that as I think even now, like, yes, we can say that there's a place and time for this, but at the end of the day, somebody has to feed the American people.
Yes.
It can't just be rah, tough, hard all the time. Somebody has to, like the president taught, and I'm not saying he's not doing it. I think he's acknowledging the spiritual side of the country, the soul. But who feeds the soul of the soldier? Who feeds the soul of the citizen?
You also need to include these first responders in this as well, because when looking at 9/11, there was military involvement, but it's the first responders that on the heavy load. And, a recent report, I think just yesterday, says that the surviving, the first responder death is now exceeding the actual number of people that died in 9/11 in the buildings themselves. And it's due to illnesses that were generated in the process of being a part of the soot and the dust, and mainly cardiovascular disorders that have that occurred. And when you're looking at, the military or first responders, yes, they've agreed to take on a heavy load in doing these, incredibly heroic jobs. But when the first responder death exceeds the death of the actual individuals that were in the buildings themselves, that's something to be said as well. And yes, we do need healing for them as well.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's funny, and we got to take another pause, but it's funny, Doc, when I've been watching these documentaries, like I said, I've been taking them all in. It's just that the first responders, I don't know how it was in New York because I was in Baltimore at the time, but the first responders, and I'm thinking about, you got those men, those firefighters, man, they went up like so many different stairwells just to try to save people. Some of them died in the stairwell because of all the dust, debris, and all of the ash and everything. And when you look at the clips, I mean, you're like, these men literally, for that moment, we saw a level of humanity that was probably unseen in America for a very long time, where they didn't think about color, they didn't think about economic status. All they thought about was saving lives. And I mean, you got to thank them. You got to thank them. But more importantly, you got to honor them with respect, not just in words, with policy. You got to honor them with respect in they wanting to see us as a country. They put their lives on the line. Has the country gotten better? And I'm not talking about policy and politics. We already talked about that. I'm talking about, do we treat each other better? Do we respect each other? It happened briefly after 9/11. I mean, I think we were all kind of like behind President Bush, and we were like, yeah, rah. But that faded away over time, over these 22 years.
And it's just worse. It's gotten worse.
And that's what I'm saying. It's gotten worse. And I mean, nobody goes into that level of service. I'm talking about fire departments, police officials. Nobody goes into that saying, hey, man, I want to go this, but I want to only protect and serve this particular group and not that group. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's insane. Like, oh, I will put out the fire in this neighborhood, but not in that neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, nobody is thinking that. Like, and it's sad because we're like reminiscing, we're reflecting on this moment of great humanity in this country. And then we look at the present moment and it's like, damn, we didn't learn.
Yeah, we didn't learn. And then COVID is an excellent example. Here was another opportunity where the country could have come together, and we messed that up horribly. And I don't blame necessarily the people. The politics were horrific. And here's something, we're talking about a health emergency.
Yeah.
A health emergency. And we were more divided than I think we had ever been. And it's continued. And so, you know, I would hope that people do reflect on who we were at 9/11 and realize that none of the silly things that people get obsessed with now even has no weight and does not matter. And if we could get back to those people and to that idealism in this country, we would be a better country.
Oh, absolutely. Let's take a quick pause. When we come back, some final remarks as we continue to talk about health, wellness, reclaim your wellness with Dr. Bridget, and of course with you. Stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Get up, go, go, go.
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We've been checking in with our doctor, Dr. Bridget, MD, for Reclaim Your Wellness, as we have been talking about handling grief. And we got a few moments left, Doc. And I wanted to see if we can talk about any resources or any additional support that folks can go to, whether it's related to September 11th or whether it's related to COVID. And I think that any national tragedy, we need to have some processing time. What would you say the people can go to? How can people be supported, especially during these great times of just pain and tragedy?
Well, I would say, you know, whatever pocket of the country that you're living in, there are definitely different support group churches that are providing opportunities to communicate and allow opportunities for people to grieve. There are a number of different things that came out of 9/11, particularly for the children. There was Tuesday's Children, that was an organization to help children deal with this. And the fact of the matter is, my children weren't even born during this, and so much time has gone by. And there's been particularly a focus on getting young people involved in these ceremonies this year so that they understand that we will not forget and that they're a part of this history and understand how it still impacts people to this day. But there's the Memorial Museum, there's the Tribute Center, there's the Voices of September 11th for people that need to have someone help them through this process and get the resources that they need to survive, after this tragedy. And so there's a number of different groups, but keep in mind that seeing your therapist, understanding where you are in your grieving process, or whether you are actually dealing with a more prolonged grieving process, whether it's 9/11, COVID, or some other experience that you have been a part of or viewed, that you do the work. We don't have to live broken. We don't have to live in pain, that we can actually do the work to, be in a better place and be able to see our mortality and our lives, and the lives of friends and family in a way that's understandable and that we can live better lives because of them.
I love that. I absolutely love that, Doc. And I think that it's also important to recognize that people are going to grieve differently. And I know, say it again.
And respect that, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing. Respect that people do grieve differently, and that's perfectly okay.
Absolutely. And that these tragedies will affect communities differently. So what may have affected white America is going to feel different for Black America. And so since we are in that time, how do we make sure that our care at this point, our grief handling process is catered just for where we are? How do you handle that? Or how do you make that happen, rather?
Well, number one, it's awareness. Like, this conversation in itself, I think, is very, I don't want to say triggering, but it definitely puts some people on the spot as they listen, because they have to determine, where am I in my grieving process, and have I dealt with this well? And that's why this type of conversation is incredibly important. And so it's important that we give people the space to grieve differently, give people the space to take their time with it, but also be a friend to your friends and family around you. I've seen more people get stuck, that they are in that prolonged space. Not necessarily that they're, crying and they can't move on with their lives day to day, but that they haven't moved beyond it to be able to see their loved one's life in a more, humane and a celebratory way, that celebrating what they gave instead of focusing on what has moved on. And friend, respect that people do it differently, but be a friend to those around you. And when you see that they have not moved on with their lives in different ways, be there to communicate and have that conversation.
McCall, you said one of the things that irks me is when people try to tell other people how they should grieve and the length of time they need to be grieving. Everyone doesn't grieve the same. I agree. Benny, thank you, McCall. Benny Hill, you checked in and said, look, I've learned of too many Black community bombings in the past few years that I can only sympathize with the country in these instances. Yeah. I, to that point, to Benny's point, and to the point you just made, Doc, I think that is the kind of very unique space that Black folks in this country kind of take, that we unfortunately have been too familiar with mass tragedy. And so when it does happen on a nationwide level, like what we saw with September 11th or COVID or anything, it's like our humanity compels us to say something, but it's like, man, unfortunately, this stuff has been happening to Black folks in our history. So, it's almost like you have to kind of work through that to even get to a place to not seem like you're completely just disregarding the loss of life for any other group of people, even though Black people died in September 11th.
Yes.
Even though Black people died.
And school shootings and everything
school
else
shooting,
involved.
right?
You know, and I think it's also taking
Thank you, Benny.
and saying how if you feel this, if you feel compelled to do something, and many people did after 9/11, they joined the military, they became first responders. You know, there's ways to take your energy and your talents and say, you know, I could make a difference by doing this. And do that, because it is also a part of your healing process. And though it may be 22 years later, like you said, as Black Americans, we're not, this is nothing new to us. You know, we've spent our history in this country dealing with things like this. And we need to be willing to do the work to get through it, and then use your talents to help others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Bridget, I appreciate you so much. I know we had other things on the agenda, but, you know, this is where the spirit takes us sometimes. So, you know, we just go along with the energy. But I truly appreciate you because, you know, this is something that is near and dear to my heart. And I've been wanting to have this conversation with a medical professional like yourself for a very long time, and with us, just to say, look, take time to process and grieve. When things happen, it's okay to stop.
Yeah. And I'll talk about it more at 5:30. I'll do Instagram Live, and we'll talk about medications. You know, like we'll get a little bit more into the medical aspect of it, and to not be afraid of that either, because many times, you know, particularly as Black people, we don't want to take the meds. I get it, you know. And so we'll dig a little bit more into, you know, how we can help ourselves and help our families.
There it is right there. Dr. Bridget is our resident doctor, family physician, cannabis expert. You can check her out every Monday, folks, here on The Culture, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She does have her after chats at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on her Instagram page, and y'all can follow her. If you haven't followed her, make sure you follow her, Dr. Bridget, on Instagram. And she always has a number of a lot of content about where she's moving, conversations she's having, and just people she's networking with. So definitely follow her on Instagram and all the social media platforms. And Doc, we are always happy to have you on. So thank you once again for being on and being so good for the culture.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. I want to thank each one of you, my online culture crew members, for joining me in the conversation. A very different show, a very reflective show, but I hope that you found that this was some much needed conversation as we honor those who have lost their lives 22 years ago in New York City and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. We should never forget this day. This is a day that will forever live in our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. But more importantly, it should live in us in such a way that we don't want to just zoom past it. We don't want to just act as if it was a small thing. This is a very big thing. It's a very big thing. And it's an opportunity for us to get reconnected to one another, folks, on a very humanistic level. And it's okay. That is okay for us to grieve. That is okay for us to remember. That is okay for us to feel for a fellow person once again. All right, folks, I want to thank my fantastic production team, Joel, Shannon, Maddie, Chris, Lisa, and my man King Keenan for making me look and sound so good. Make sure you do your due diligence. If you enjoyed the conversation that we had today, make sure you go to our website at blackstarnetwork.com. You can download the app for free. Follow us on social media, but your financial support means everything to us, folks. Absolutely does. So I want to give a big shout out to Lana Omaroji, who is a part now of the Bring the Funk fan club at level 1. Lana, thank you so much for your support. Let's give Lana a little horn or something. We got to thank her for something, because Lana definitely put in that work to show her support. Also, Charles Matthews, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of the Bring the Funk fan club level 1. We truly, truly appreciate your support. And folks, again, just go to blackstarnetwork.com, donate today, and continue to power this momentum, this digital movement that we have here at Black Star Network. As I mentioned earlier, we are streaming a number of things. We've certainly streamed the full context of President Biden's remarks from Alaska, as he gives his remarks in remembrance of September 11th. We also streamed the memorial procession. So if you haven't seen that yet from earlier this morning in New York City, that has been streaming throughout the day, and a lot more great content. So do your due diligence, get connected, watch the team. A big shout out to my sister Suzette Speaks. She's always checking in every so often as much as she can. So make sure y'all support her on all of her social media spaces and all the great work that a lot of contributors are doing here on Black Star Network. We also want to thank Mr. Mitch Peterson from OnStar from having a very informative conversation about National Preparedness Month. September is National Preparedness Month. You can go to ready.gov to get more information about that. All the resources and things you need to know to keep your family safe during any natural disaster or any type of unexpected event. So go to ready.gov to get that. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned. Up next at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is RMU, Roland Martin Unfiltered. As always, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong. Stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. God willing, we will talk tomorrow for another exciting edition of The Culture right here, only here, exclusively here on the Black Star Network. Follow me on all social media platforms, and God willing, we'll reconnect with you soon. Talk to you soon. Peace.